It wasn't until this morning, in fact, during rehearsal, that Kevin shared with me the news. Typically, I am following the news pretty regularly, but hadn't last night. Yesterday was my mom's 91st birthday. So, yeah, well, thank you. So we were a little preoccupied with that, and I didn't have the news on, and I didn't check this morning. And so when Kevin told me the news of the bombing of Iran, my heart sank. My heart sank. When Nicole came in, I asked her how she was doing. Her family is from Iran. She has family in Iran. And you know, it's then when things feel so much closer, right? So much more personal. I think about the number of people that it wasn't until they met or had a family member that came out of the closet and said that they were gay or lesbian, that then their mind and their heart opened to seeking to understand and to embrace and not to judge and not to criticize, but to draw in and to include. And I think that it's when things become more personal and closer to home that the stakes seem that much higher. And I don't profess to have the answers by any means, but I sure as heck don't think that the way to create a world that works for everyone is to bomb the heck out of the world, no matter who's doing the bombing. And it causes me to just challenge myself to go as deep as I possibly can into spiritual practice and teaching, and to hold on to that as best I can, not to be blind, not to ignore, but to make sure that I am as centered and available to be used in whatever way I can to make a positive difference right where I am in the people that I interact with. When I realized what had happened, and I thought about, gosh, you know, the music this morning couldn't be, in my opinion, more perfect for what many of us might be feeling. And the message today, as I have been continuing in this series on the drawing from ancient wisdom, ancient traditions and practices to help us be able to live better and more effectively and purposefully in our modern lives, I look and I'm talking about faith. Any of you feel like there's divine synchronicity at work, discovering a deeper faith and letting our faith evolve? That's what I want to really emphasize today. You know, we're probably all at various places in our spiritual growth and maturity and understanding, and probably at different degrees of expression in terms of faith. But no matter where we are, I think that we can deepen into faith, and we can allow for our faith to evolve and grow. I believe, though, that in order for one's faith to evolve, that one has to be willing to challenge and to question some of the things that maybe we've been told that we had to just accept on faith. I know, having grown up in the Lutheran Church, that there were things I was told that didn't make sense to my mind, but I was told I just had to take it on faith. And it was as if it was not permitted to ask questions. I'm so grateful that in New Thought, in Unity, and Science of the Mind, that we are encouraged to ask questions. And to ask questions not just of whoever's got the microphone and is in front of you or whoever's writing a book, but to ask questions of the things that maybe you have assumed to be true, to periodically check in on your own beliefs. To evolve a deeper faith may also involve doing some healing work. Earlier, or was it last year, I can't remember now, but in the not too distant past, one of our members and I presented a class on healing from religious trauma, where some of the trauma that is experienced in religion is not just the horrific trauma of physical or sexual abuse, but can be the trauma of being ostracized and shamed because one dared to ask questions. I think we need to dare to ask questions, and not just in matters of faith, but in all matters, to be willing to ask questions. 2 Corinthians 5:7 reminds us, "For we walk by faith, not by sight." We walk by faith, not by sight. The journey of mature faith moves us from doubt to depth. Let me repeat that. The journey of mature faith moves us from doubt to depth. It's an evolution from black and white thinking or from no belief at all, an evolution from black and white thinking or no belief at all to a faith that embraces depth and mystery. In unity, faith is not a blind belief, but rather an inner knowing and trust in spiritual law. So it's not a blind belief, but it's an inner knowing, a trusting in spiritual law, in spiritual principles. Some of the most interesting journeys of people who have grown in faith or who have experienced a maturing and evolving of their faith comes from an area that we might be surprised, the area of science. There are any number of contemporary scientists today whose journey in their field of science has led them to a deeper spiritual faith, not necessarily a religion, but a deeper spiritual faith. And I'm going to share some of it with you because I think it helps us to broaden our acceptance of the mystery of life and the understanding that there must be something behind that mystery, that organizing principle. And so for many scientists, it begins with this idea of what's called a cosmological argument. Have you ever heard that phrase before? A cosmological argument. The cosmological argument goes something like this. I'm going to give you kind of a brief description of it. The very fact that there is something rather than nothing is seen as a reality that needs explaining. So the very fact that there is a universe, that there are beings, animals, trees, plants, stuff, the very fact that there is something rather than nothing is seen as a reality that needs explaining. That something, the universe, had a beginning. Some scientists call that beginning the Big Bang Theory. The idea of a cosmological argument then goes on to say that the universe is contingent, meaning that the universe could have failed to exist, that it's not a logical, automatic conclusion that the universe would have existed at all. It then goes on to acknowledge that the universe is ordered and has a design, right? It's ordered, it has a design. Some versions point to the apparent order and complexity of the universe as evidence that there must be a designer. And the argument becomes that these features of the universe require an explanation. You see how it's pairing and peeling back and going deeper and deeper? And it's argued that the explanation cannot be found within the universe itself, so it must lie in something beyond the universe, and this something is then identified and called by some as God. The cosmological argument, the fact that there is something rather than nothing, that existence demands some sort of explanation, and that going deeper and deeper and trying to find an answer to that one eventually comes upon there must have been something beyond the physical that put this in motion. Does that make sense? Big thinking. And so many scientists, while not necessarily endorsing any specific religion, have expressed a sense of awe and wonder as they've gone deeper into their own particular fields. A sense of awe and wonder about the complexity and the intricacy and the order of the universe that's caused them to kind of come to a conclusion that there must be something that put this all in place, leading to a feeling that it can't just be material. Does that make sense? Yeah, am I just talking to myself this morning? Okay. So in researching for this lesson, I found a few scientists I wanted to just touch upon with you that have had this experience of the deeper they've gone into trying to understand the mystery, the more they have connected with this awareness that there must be a presence, an energy, a something. They don't all call it the same thing, but that there's something. And the reason I think it's important for us to recognize that something is it helps us, I believe, to navigate through the tough places in our lives, individually and collectively, to be able to lean into and to trust that. So there is a scientist by the name of Dr. Francis Collins. He's a geneticist. He was a former director of the Human Genome Project, and he was a professed atheist for the early years of his life. But as he started to study genes, as he started to go deeper and deeper into understanding this field, this phenomena, he found that the intricacy and the complexity of the human genes was so mind-boggling that he referred to it as the language of God. And the deeper he went, the more he was convinced that there is something beyond what just his rational mind could label and understand that had to be at work. And he's written extensively. He's written a lot about the connection between the harmony of science and faith, which I think is like a remarriage, because if you think about it, in the very early days of the church was the organization that had the money, right? And the church funded the arts. Think of the Renaissance. The church funded science and exploration and creativity until science started to suggest things like maybe the world and the universe operates a little bit differently than what is written about in the book of Genesis. And it was like, in my opinion, the church and science divorced. And now it seems to me that the church, but science and spirituality are rejoining. Dr. Jennifer Wiseman, who is an astrophysicist and a cosmologist, studies star formation and the origins of the universe. It's filled her with a sense of wonder and awe at the vastness and the complexity. Think about it for a moment, just the extremes of a scientist looking at the microcosm of life to a scientist looking at the macrocosm, infinity in both directions, right? That's what infinity is, the vastness, the mystery. Can our human minds comprehend this? No. But the very fact that our human minds in and of themselves cannot comprehend it leads us, I think, to stepping into embracing the mystery behind it all. And when we step into the mystery behind it all, I think we then can begin to evolve and to grow in our faith. Dr. Jennifer Wiseman sees science as a way to explore and understand God's creation. Then there's Dr. Ard Lewis. He's a theoretical biophysicist. He studies the complex systems found in nature, from the folding patterns of proteins to the behavior of flocks of birds. So he's studying the systems in nature. And his work has led him to appreciate the elegance and self-organization of these systems, which he says is evidence that there must be a divine intelligence in back of all of this. In Scripture, we're told we live, move, and have our being in God. And in metaphysics, we embrace that, and we say also it lives, moves, and has its being in and through us. The intricate connectedness and pattern of it all. The faith that unity embraces is not a faith in a set of beliefs. It's a way of living and being. It's a way of living and being that recognizes that we may not always understand everything that's happening around us, but we can trust that there is a principle and a presence beneath it that will carry us and it through. We can be anchored in that and sustained in that to be able to make it through, whether it's individual complexity or scary times or collective complexity and scary times. How many of you have ever read or heard the term neurotheology? A couple of you. Of course you would, Jan Phillips, brilliant thinker. I had never read or heard the term neurotheology. So there is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Andrew Newberg. He is a neuroscientist at Thomas Jefferson University. And he focuses on neurotheology. And neurotheology explores the relationship between spiritual experiences and brain function. Would you not say that that is the remarriage of science and religion, or the remarriage of science and faith? The neurotheology, exploring the relationship between spiritual principles and brain function. You've all heard and know something about the neuroplasticity of the brain, right? There was a time, and I think it was probably within most of our lifetimes, that it was believed that the brain eventually kind of stopped growing and evolving with all of its neurons and so forth at a certain point past childhood. And now it's clearly understood and known how malleable the brain is. And that things like affirmations and meditation and mindfulness and prayer work because they help to rewire the brain or wire the brain in new ways. This is not woo-woo stuff anymore. It's measurable. It's something we can count on. And so neurotheology is the attempt to kind of map that out, to see and try to measure or understand what happens in the brain of somebody who is meditating consistently or praying consistently or working at the level of loving kindness consistently, that it actually is changing the way their brain is functioning. So what does all of this have to do with navigating the tough places in our lives? I think what it has to do is it helps us to broaden the way that we look at things. I know that when I'm experiencing a tough situation in my life, whether it's personal or work-related, that I have the probably very human tendency to get very focused on that thing. Anybody else do that? Right? And it's like what happens when we get just focused on that thing, we forget that that thing is one slice or one part of our life. It's not the totality of it. I've used this example so much in the last few months as I've either talked to colleagues or I've done counseling sessions. I say, if I were to hold up a big piece of white paper in front of you with a black dot on it and ask you what you see, most people would say, what? The black dot. And if I said, okay, yes, there's a black dot, what else do you see? They say the black dot. What else do you see? Is this a trick question? Well, no, not really. What else do you see? And then eventually someone will go, oh, the white paper. The white paper. Faith is like the white paper. Faith says don't be confused or don't be tricked thinking that all that is existing is the thing that seems so visible right in front of you, this black dot. Whether we're talking about the world and the wars going on, or you're talking about your own finances and problems at home and addictions with a loved one, or whatever it is, not to minimize it. I mean, some of those black dots are pretty hard to deal with. Would you not agree? But those black dots are not the totality. And faith reminds us of that. Faith says never, ever, ever forget the white paper. When you think of faith, do you think of it as a noun or a verb? Verb? A+. You know, I grew up in a time when people would, if they didn't ask you what was your religion, they would often phrase it differently, and they say, what is your faith? Meaning, what is your religion? What is your denomination? I don't know if that is the way it's worded anymore today, but that answer of what is your faith is faith as a noun. It's, oh, I belong to this set of beliefs. Whereas what I'm talking about is faith as a verb. Faith as a way of living and being. I love the story in Jesus' life of the storm and the disciples in the boat getting frightened, and Jesus is out on the water a distance from them. And Jesus tells Peter to come and walk to him. And can you imagine trying to get out of the boat, right? You know? But Peter gets out of the boat and attempts to walk toward Jesus. What I love about that story is not the fact that Peter started to sink, as soon as we're told, as soon as he became more aware of the wind and the waves on the water, but that he had the courage and the faith to get out of the boat. You and I are being called, I think at this point in the world's history, to be a little bit like Peter, to be willing to get out of the boat, to be willing to let our faith be a willing and activating force in our lives. Faith is the ability to believe, intuit, and perceive spiritual truth and spiritual evidence and not be fooled by appearances. And not be fooled by appearances. Unity's approach to faith is not a blind faith, as I've said, but rather an inner knowing and an absolute trusting that there is a presence and a power always at work, even if we can't see it clearly with our human eyes just yet. As I close, I want to share some suggestions for deepening one's faith. The first, I think, is to be willing to deeply examine the things you were told you simply had to believe on faith. So it begins, I think, with being willing to deeply examine those things, to challenge those things, to challenge anything you hear me saying. Just because I'm saying it, it may not land on you as true and living. In Unity, Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, used to say, take what makes sense to you, leave the rest, take what makes sense to you, and test it in the laboratory of your life. See if a living faith doesn't help you to live your life in a better way. Test it out. Test it out. So be willing to deeply examine the things you were told you simply had to take on faith. A second suggestion is challenge yourself to think wide and deep. That's part of the reason I wanted to share with you some of the scientists that I think are so incredibly inspiring, these brilliant minds doing the kind of work that they're doing, and yet coming to a place where they recognize there's something more than just what they can physically see and measure. Challenge yourself to think deep and wide. Another suggestion, ponder the vastness and the mystery of the universe. I know that probably sounds really huge, but do it anyway. Do it anyway. Just ponder it. I remember the first time I read, it was in an article, the idea that the biggest question is why there is something rather than nothing. My mind went nuts over that. It's like I never thought to ask a question like that. Why is there something rather than nothing? That's a really big question. Would you not agree? It kind of pulls us up and out of the myopic, am I using that word right? Fixation on that black dot. The black dot's still there, but it helps us to pull back out and see things more in perspective. So ponder the vastness and mysteriousness. Engage in self-reflection. Engage in self-reflection. Have some conversations about what faith is for you. Those of you who are here, go into the cafe and have some conversations. Talk to one another. Challenge one another. Have the courage to share what your thoughts are about faith, what you do to deepen or to evolve your faith. And hang out with people who trust in the divine mystery. Hang out with people who will tell you, yeah, there's a black dot. There's a lot of them, actually. But there's a bigger, infinite piece of white paper. Namaste.